I am Jacob Rodriguez, an archaeology student at the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, and welcome to a brief archaeological overview of the Mesa Site, Alaska, an exhibition of the Paleo-Indians above the Arctic Circle. To begin, the Mesa Site is located on high ground, rising 55 meters or 180 feet above the surrounding area. It sits beside a creek that drains water from the nearby Brooks mountain range, which begins to rise only 15 kilometers south from the mesa. The wider region is known as the Alaska North Slope, highlighted here on the map. Despite intuition, this area was never covered by the great glaciers that buried Chicago and Toronto under kilometers of ice. Rather, due to its unique landscape as a coastal plain and shielded from the elements by the Cretaceous Age Brooks Mountains, the North Slope never became a frigid and icy place. When humans first entered the area, crossing the land bridge known as Beringia, they found what scientists today call the Mammoth Steppe. The Mammoth Steppe is a now extinct ecosystem that is most similar to today's tundras. It was very cold and continental in climate, but the movement of megafauna would churn up nutrients in the soil, allowing for new plant growth in the warmer summer months, and the wide movement of nutrients across the landscape as herds of mammoths, H. bison, and horses moved along. Finally, when humans first arrived in the greater Arctic, it was shortly before the last glacial maximum, or roughly 16,000 years ago. At that time, the mammoth steppe was strong, and though the climate itself was variable, the ecosystem was stable. Once the ice started melting, however, it marked the end of the ice age as we know it, and the mammoth steppe began disappearing. The climate around the world became more stable, and agriculture began to appear, but in the Arctic, this spelled the end for the mammoth steppe. Therefore, the megafauna, from rising temperatures, habitat loss, and human predation, eventually dwindled in number and went extinct sometime before 11,000 years ago. At the Mesa Site, the people who lived there were the last bastion of a fading world, a fading memory of the Ice Age. The cultures of the Arctic have a deep and storied history, and that for brevity's sake I'm omitting. But there are certain characteristics that most people of the Arctic have shared that should be defined here first. Working from the ground up, material culture. Material culture to archaeologists is the physical stuff humans leave behind. Every time you throw a plate of bones for chicken wings in the trash, or drop a quarter and lose it in the grass, you're leaving a material record that future archaeologists might find. What we find in material culture that the peoples of the Arctic left behind is a number of adaptations related to life in the far polar regions of the planet, namely things like small bone needles and awls made to sew and stitch animal hides together to make warm winter clothing. We also find their tools that they used to hunt these animals, which are often made of a stone called chert, also known as flint, or on occasion volcanic glass, known as obsidian. These tools are usually crafted in a specific way that can signify cultural affiliation. Think about it like this. If somebody were to look in our respective houses and in mine find a molcajete in my kitchen, but a mortar and pestle in yours, they might correctly guess that I come from a Latin American background, despite the fact that both implements serve the same purpose. In the same way that archaeologists can look at the way stone tools are crafted to help determine when and by whom an artifact was made, in the Arctic, two of the main types of stone tools we find that tell the passage of time and differences in culture are the bifaces and microblades. Bifaces are chunks of flint that have been worked to make a flat plane so that there's only two sides. They are usually supposed to be projectile points or knives. The famous arrowhead of the National Park Service is an example of a biface. Microblades, on the other hand, are very thin, almost spike-like pieces of chert that are at least twice as long as they are wide. They are found associated with tools called burins, small stone tools with a pointed edge that were meant to carve holes in bone or wood, where the microblades were then placed to create a composite tool. What is particularly perplexing about the Mesa site is that despite its time period and cultural region of the Alaskan Arctic being dominated by microblade technology, it is large bifaces that are found in the site's primary material record. They are also eerily similar to other large bifaces known from the continental United States on the high plains, such as those used by the prehistoric bison hunting cultures turned Paleo-Indian, of which several are pictured here. What could be the reason for this similarity? Could Paleo-Indian peoples from the high plains have returned to the Arctic and populated the Alaskan North Slope? As mentioned previously, the people who lived at the mesa were living in the Arctic Circle, enduring cold winters amidst a changing climate, so that the landscape that they knew would have been significantly different only 1,000 years prior. So, a thought experiment. How would you adapt to climate change fundamentally changing the landscape? Remember, the ecosystem is changing, so animals are disappearing or declining in number. Plants, rains, and growing seasons are all becoming more unpredictable from year to year. How do you survive? Well, The Mesa people answered this question not by relocation, but through lifestyle adaptation. The likely ancestors of the Mesa people would have been using microblade technology and pursuing large mammals of the Pleistocene, the megafauna. Their primary form of subsistence, the way they actually got their food, would have involved the gathering of the sparse edible plant material of the mammoth steppe during the summer and fall seasons, and the reliance on freshly procured or cached meat throughout the whole of the year. During the Ice Age, when megafauna were abundant, they could nourish a group for a significant period of time and plant populations were stable, so this was a sustainable form of living. When the glaciers began to melt, however, the megafauna largely went extinct, and thus the main food source for the ancestors of the Mesa people disappeared. Now, you may be thinking, aren't there still large mammals in the Arctic North? Indeed, there are. Modern peoples unrelated to the Mesa people make use of the reindeer/caribou, elk, and musk oxen. However, these are established populations that have had 10,000 years to grow to their current size and adapt to the environment. When the megafauna went extinct, the Mesa people would have only found sparse herds of caribou and the occasional musk ox on the steppe. A meal to be sure, but not enough to sustain a group year round. However, there was one more species of large mammal that disappeared after most of the megafauna, but before the modern day, a truly ancient species of bison that all modern North American bison today descend from, Bison priscus, or the steppe bison. Biomass calculations suggest that after the megafauna, such as the woolly mammoth, horses, and giant deer disappeared, it was the steppe bison that became the largest share, with the caribou and musk oxen only contributing about a fifth to a third. Biomass just means how much life form there is physically. Three humans have more biomass than three ferns, even if there's the same number of individuals. What seems to have happened simultaneously with the dominance of the steppe bison is the production of large bifaces that, as mentioned previously, are eerily similar to those Paleo-Indian ones found on the high plains. This almost certainly wasn't contact with contemporaneous peoples in Montana or Kansas, but rather an example of convergent evolution. Both groups relied on the bison as a source of food, as in both environments they dominated the ecology. So, at some point, both groups must have come to the conclusion independently that the best way to hunt one of the last megafauna, large bison, was not to use microblades, but rather large lancelet bifaces that could be propelled with a spear thrower. There are an abundance of ways to hunt bison, but there's only a few that won't waste material or get you trampled in the process. Using large bifaces that were intended to greatly injure the animal and break off on impact seems to be one of them. So, we now know that the Mesa people were likely relying on large steppe bison as a source of food, and that their reliance on them is likely why the bifaces they produce seem so out of character for the Arctic, both temporally and geographically. We can also suppose that all of this represents a unique example of a human group adapting to a changing world by shifting their tool and subsistence strategies. But what does this have to do with a mesa? Picture it. The cool breeze of late August rushes across the steppe as you look north towards the enigmatic Arctic Sea. The grass is low, and the peat of the summer thaw is beginning to refreeze. The midnight sun still hangs overhead, but it's edging closer and closer to the horizon each passing day, a sign that the deep polar night is on its way. You and your band, no more than 30 people strong, need to find food today. The last successful hunt was almost 5 days ago now, and the meat you didn't cache for winter is nearly gone. You look north to the sloping plains and the sea, and you can make out some shapes and figures, but you can only see so far. You look south and wish you could see from the tops of the mighty mountains. From there you could see every herd and animal in the area. In that moment, though, you spot a section of high ground, disconnected from the greater mountain range that lies in their foothills. When you go to explore this place, you find it is an isolated mesa-like formation rising above the surrounding area, giving you a complete 360-degree view of the region. There is a creek nearby where a base camp can be established, and from up on the platform of the mesa, you and any hunters would be able to see any groups of bison friscus grazing across the plains. From there, with calculations of remaining daylight, distance, need, and material, you could decide whether or not to try for a hunt. This is why the Mesa Site was used by ancient humans. It was a hunting lookout. Archaeologists did not find evidence of human habitation in the sense of tents or structures or even cooking hearths. Rather, they find pieces of rock, thousands of them, that were discarded while the Mesa people repaired and remade their stone tools, all surrounding campfires that were not meant to cook, but to keep the hunters warm while they scouted out in the frigid midnight sun. Now, the story I've told you of ancient northern hunters long ago is by no means definitive. Archaeology is an ever changing discipline, and the techniques like old fashioned unit excavation and radiocarbon dating can always be supported by newer techniques that can reveal previously unknown angles. There is a lot we just don't know about the Mesa and its people. There are always new perspectives just waiting to be uncovered.